All right, the book is called The Case for Nationalism, How It Made Us Powerful, United, and Free, written by the editor of the National Review, New York Times bestselling author Rich Lowry. Rich, great to see you. Great to have you back here on Newsmax.
Hey, John. Thanks so much for having me.
No problem. You know, today, just for fun, I took a look at Merriam-Webster. They list some synonyms for nationalism. I'm going to read those for you here. Jingoism, xenophobia, nativism, excessive favoritism towards one's own country. But your book tells a much different story, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'll have to have a conversation with the people at
Right?
Merriam-Webster. I think that's totally false. Nationalism, or at least national feeling, very old, it's very natural, it's very powerful. Empires and totalitarian ideologies have tried to wipe it off away over the centuries have failed. And what it is just the idea that a distinct people united by a common history, common culture, common language should govern a distinct territory. That's nationalism in a nutshell. It's been crucially important to the American tradition across the years. Wouldn't have had a revolution without nationalism, wouldn't have a constitution, a victory in the Civil War, or a continental expansion without nationalism. So it's been crucially important to the history of our country, and is a thread that runs right through Hamilton, Lincoln, and Teddy Roosevelt.
And we wouldn't have President Trump without nationalism either, right?
Correct. He really picked up this baton that had been left on the floor by both parties. Democrats, for years now, completely turned their backs excuse me, on nationalism and embraced a cosmopolitanism, so they don't have the nationalistic themes and tendencies that you saw in FDR and JFK. Republicans also have lost touch, or had lost touch, with nationalism under the influence of a libertarianism and of a transnational business elite that valued the market over and above borders. So this very powerful political force was kind of left there, and Trump recognized, whether instinctively or consciously or what, I don't know which, that this was something important to hit on, and he did, and the rest is history.
Maybe it was all of the above. You know, some people might see this book, Rich, and think back on the National Review edition of Against Trump and say this is quite a departure of that type of, mindset when it comes to dealing with Donald Trump.
Yeah, so we ran that issue during the primaries, actually before anyone had voted, when there were 16 other Republican alternatives to Donald Trump. There are no Republican alternatives to Donald Trump at the moment. The only alternative is, perhaps Elizabeth Warren heading down the track with a $50 trillion health care plan. And I, at least, have taken the opportunity of the Trump era, to kind of kick the tires of some old assumptions and presuppositions. And a lot of them, I think, are true, still hold true, but I've changed my mind on a few things. One of them is trade with China, and nationalism I just really hadn't thought a lot about. And I had accepted some of the lazy definitions and cliches,
right,
like from the dictionary
exactly, right,
definition you read from, and delved into it and thought about it more deeply.
Yeah, and I want to focus back. I'm kind of jumping around here, but I had mentioned this in this segment because, it's clear you did or were willing to kick the tires early on. Something that you wrote about a year and a half ago for Politico magazine that I remember, and I was struck by this reading the book. This is what you wrote about Trump at the time. Surprisingly, Trump has been loyal to the constituent parts of his coalition on judges, social conservative, and anti-abortion causes, and gun rights, with the occasional rhetorical wobble. He's been solid. His desperation to get anything he can call a wall on the southern border speaks to his genuine desire to deliver on one of his signature promises. The same can be said about his bout of tariffs this year. That's the thing, right, with Trump. Populism is also a critical component to his national identity, and Trump continues to fight for his constituents, whether you like his style or not.
Yeah, so a couple things. I'm a conservative, not a populist. So populists are more favorable to government or activism kind of across the board.
Right.
That's not where I am. But I will say, just on Trump specifically, and this has been quite surprising, this is something I would not have predicted or expected, he's been like a rock on really key issues. Abortion,
right,
pro-life, one of the most important. This New York billionaire who, lived a wild lifestyle when he was here in New York City, being a warrior for pro-life causes is just something, it's near miraculous. No one ever would have expected that. Conscience rights and religious liberty, judges, and down the line. So I still have a lot of policy differences with him, and I still have, obviously differences with how he conducts himself in office. But on those key things, he's been unassailable, and I give him credit for it.
And the Republican Party has always been a coalition party, right, of libertarians and conservatives and all this stuff. And, Trump has some, whether it's with his sheer force, he has the ability to at least get them unified behind him. You talk about his stance with anti-abortion. That's why these evangelicals still support him, regardless of what Democrats say. Now, you trace the origins of nationalism back to biblical times in the book, but specifically when it comes to American history, what period would you say is most similar to what we're seeing right now in our politics?
Oh, that's probably the contention over Andrew Jackson and his presidency. And, Trump has at times looked explicitly back to Jackson as an example. Jackson, a great populist, a great small d Democrat, someone who distrusted the elite and was hated by the elite and was really a hate figure in politics at that time, and a subject of fear and loathing for people who opposed the Jacksonian Democrats. That's probably the best analogy I think you can come up with this time and with Donald Trump. But this is an unprecedented time.
Yeah.
Every day is something new and something wild, and it's hard to come up with modern examples of anything like this.
True. It's unprecedented in many ways, but you do hear people talking about things like the Civil War. Congressman Louis Gohmert recently said this about impeachment.
And it's about to push this country to a civil war if they were to get their wishes. And if there's one thing I don't want to see in my lifetime, I don't want to ever have participation in, it's a civil war. Some historian, I don't remember who, said guns are only involved in the last phase of a civil war.
Again, just to be fair to Gohmert, he said the last thing he wants to see is a civil war in this country. But also a recent poll conducted by Georgetown University asked voters to rate division in America on a scale of 0 to 100, with 100 being the, quote, edge of a civil war. The mean response was 67.23. Civil War number 2 was trending on Twitter this September. Why do you think this stuff is resonating with the American public?
Well, I think that the divisions are really intense, but I think it's important to have some perspective. And one, the Civil War was not just a metaphor or, a way to speak about real deep partisan divisions. It was a real fight, and
Right.
more than 700,000 people died. And it didn't just happen in a moment. It had been building for decades over a hugely contentious issue, slavery, that didn't just have deep humanitarian, ideological, and political implications. There was a geographic element to it, so the country could literally split over it. I don't see that so much today. Obviously, though, our politics is really poisonous, and part of it is beginning on day one, beginning on election day 2016. There was an element of the left and the Democratic Party that was just unwilling to accept the fact that Donald Trump had become president, which was shocking, right? I mean, it was legitimately shocking, but they've come up with excuses for why it happened ever since, and obviously focused a lot on the Russians. And the one reason why we're so far down the road on impeachment over this Ukraine matter is because so many Democrats were desperate to impeach him from the beginning over anything.
They had their minds made up. When you think about the emergence of socialism now as a tenet of the Democratic Party, it looks like either Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren have a real shot at winning the nomination. What does that say to you about the direction our country is headed?
Well, even deeper divisions. Charles Krauthammer, the late great columnist and TV pundit, used to say American politics is basically contested within the 40-yard lines, and that's just not true anymore.
Right.
Bernie Sanders is over, I don't know, on the 20-yard line or the 15-yard line. It's way over on the other side. So the Overton window of our political disagreements has gotten much bigger, and it's just shocking that there is a major figure in American public life now who is a serious candidate for president in 2016 and is again, I don't expect him to be the nominee, who self-identifies as a socialist. I recently had cause to go and look back at Ronald Reagan's great speech, Time for Choosing, in 1964, and he was talking about these socialist tendencies in the Democratic Party. And those of us conservatives, we've been saying that kind of thing forever, and they've always denied it, said we're crazy, we're smearing them. And now you actually have an explicit socialist movement within the Democratic Party. Bernie Sanders and some of the most famous and influential up-and-coming Democrats,
right.
AOC and the rest of the squad. That's an extraordinary change.
You see that in the rally in Brooklyn not too long ago. You see that at the rally with Ilhan Omar questioning, America's role in the world. It is stunning to see this stuff. Last question for you as it relates to the Republican Party itself. When you look at congressional delegations that show up to these Trump rallies, there is no question that the GOP is the party of Trump, hands down. But what about the future, Rich, of the Republican Party? All signs now point to a Trump re-election in 2020, but beyond that, give us a yes or no prediction here. Will the Republican Party be better after Trump than it was before his presidency?
I don't know. It just so depends on the circumstances and what happens. And I think he has a real shot, obviously, at being reelected, but I'm not certain of it. So much depends on what happens from here on out. But one reason I wrote The Case for Nationalism is I think skeptics and opponents of Trump, they shouldn't reject nationalism root and branch. And the Republican Party, after Trump, whenever that is or however that happens, it shouldn't just snap back to the pre-Trump era. It should absorb the lessons of Trump, what we've learned about the party, what we've learned about our national politics, and what we've learned about maybe what were some stale assumptions that needed to be cast aside. So I think that the post-Trump party should definitely have influence from him. It should be more populist and nationalist than it was prior to the rise of Trump.
All right. Rich Lowry, editor of the National Review. The new book is called The Case for Nationalism. Great to see you as always. You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for breaking news and give us a thumbs up. If you like this video, then share it with your friends. Remember, you can watch Newsmax TV live on YouTube. Newsmax TV, real news for real people.